welcome to the Mises Institute podcast. And we have a very special show, I guess we can call it today. We have two refugees from New Orleans.
The Bopsy twins.
They've been with us now for several months, ever since that horrible flood. Walter Block, who's a well-known Austrian economist and libertarian theorist.
But not as good-looking as... Go ahead.
Right. And I'm glad that we don't have a video here to offer, because you can see the glorious face of William Barnett, who is a specialist in macroeconomics, and also Mises, and they both are leaders of a burgeoning movement there at Loyola University, where the Austrians are gathering increasingly, mostly undergraduates, I guess entirely undergraduates. They're wonderful colleagues and faculty, and they will be able to talk to us a little bit about that. But all students and all faculty were chased off by the flood. But New Orleans' loss is our gain. We've been here since, when did you get here, Walter?
About a couple of days after, it was, the flood was September 28th?
No.
When was it? August 28th, wasn't it? When was it?
About then.
August 28th.
The end of August.
After, I went to 3 or 4 days to Little Rock. I drove up there because I thought I'd be coming back. And then when it looked as if I couldn't go back right away, I went to Vancouver for a month of September. And I've been here pretty much since the beginning of October. And now it's November 20th. So all of October and 3/4 of November.
Yeah. Like Barnett?
Well, actually, it's Bill. And I'm not really sure, because I don't really think, my mind doesn't work that way, but I've spent a little bit over 4 weeks here, but gone home on weekends, and one time there was a 2-week gap. So I'm talking about actual time in here.
1 week gap.
Was it 1 week? Whatever. Anyway, but the actual time here amounts to, say, 4.5 working weeks.
Both of you have been working from early morning to very late at night every day.
Well, no, that's not quite true. I work from early morning. Walter shows up much later in the day. I'm normally, I don't think, I'm always here before 7, sometimes before 6. Walter straggles in much later in the day.
You worked through the Auburn, Alabama game.
Oh, yes.
It's unprecedented. I mean, that is dedication.
Yeah, well, I straggle in at around 8 or 8:30 or 9 o'clock sometimes, and we've been working pretty much 14-hour days because, we've got no students, we've got no classes, no wives here, no family here, so we just have each other to work with.
Well, it's funny because for years we've talked about the Mises Institute as kind of serving the role of the institute in Geneva that took Mises in during a crisis, and then sure enough,
yeah, and I tell you, the people here, I mean, you of course, but Lou and everybody, the whole staff, has just been marvelous to us. I mean, it really, really has made us just feel so at home, provided for all our needs in terms of what we need for research, but also living facilities, and then of course the wonderful library here. So it really has been very, very productive. And I would say, Walter says 14-hour days. The truth of the matter is, we've been leaving here usually between 10:30 and 11 or 11:30 at night. Occasionally, maybe a little bit after 10. But, so we've been putting in good long days, more like 15-hour days, 16-hour days, whatever. But it's been very enjoyable, because Walter and I get along very well, and interested in the same things.
So we can talk about what you've been working on. I hope it's not just crosswords or something like that.
Mises macro crosswords.
I'm sure everybody's very interested in the flood question. Your observations. Walter, you wrote an article on the subject.
I think I wrote 3 or 4. It's strange. I've only been in New Orleans 4.5 years or 4 years, depending on how you count it. Bill has been born there and worked there. Well, he'll tell you about that. So I have a different perspective. But in my experience, whenever there was a hurricane, it was sort of a pain in the neck, a minor disturbance, because you'd have to get into a big traffic jam and go 10 hours for a 2-hour trip, and then you come back a day later. So I was almost thinking, I'll stay. And toward the last minute, I chickened out again, and I went, and I had like 2 days worth of underwear, and I figured I'd come right back. And then when the things burst, the levees burst, and the flooding, and I knew I couldn't come back. So it was very different this time. The view, of course, is it's not so much the storm as it was government incompetence with the levees and all sorts of other incompetences with the Army Corps of Engineers and perhaps the best picture that I remember is all those buses, those school buses, tons of school buses halfway up to their hubcaps in water, and then there were people in it used to be called the Superdome, but now it's called the Sewer Dome. And so here you have people, and here you have buses, and never the twain shall meet, and that's sort of like, if you had to take one picture of government at work, that you could do worse than pick that one.
I remember very well these days, everybody was concerned about the hurricane, and I think it was Sunday, everybody was very worried, then Monday came, and all the reports said that it was fine. I seem to remember reading that the FEMA bureaucrats were saying, well, it looks like New Orleans dodged the bullet. And then 24 hours later.
Well, that's when the levees broke.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's not true. The levees didn't break, although they may call them. We have levees at the river and the lake, and they are very broad at the base, and they rise. So there's a huge, rise. The slope is very gradual, so that there's a huge amount of mud between the water of the lake or the river, because we're in between the lake and the river, and the land in between. But the canals, which is where they broke, these are flood walls in effect, which are very narrow and high. They're high like the levees, but they're very narrow, and those are what broke. Those are the things that broke.
Now, what about people who say that even if it were private, that nothing could have stopped that storm, or at least that private markets would have never been willing to undertake the expense necessary to have stopped that storm? This is just a fluke, and there's no sense.
Well, I think you have to ask the whole question: if it was private, would New Orleans exist like it did then, at the time of the flood? I mean, government subsidized flood insurance, government built levees, things like that. Without that, New Orleans, as we knew it before the flood, couldn't have existed. The land wouldn't have supported that kind of population, and it wouldn't, I don't think, have been in anybody's interest to try and develop the type of city that was there. So the city itself is really a product of government.
Well, New Orleans is glorious, and if it wouldn't exist in a market, isn't that a market failure?
Well, the question is, to what extent New Orleans should be rebuilt. Now, you have to understand, of course, that I come from a little bit different perspective. I live, if you have this visual picture of New Orleans in that big bend in the river, the Crescent City, to the west there's the next downward loop of the river is, it's like an inverted triangle with the apex at the base, standing on that. And I live way down in that point, you see. So I am on very high land. I've been there through all kinds of floods in the last roughly 30 years, never had a drop of rising water in my house. Don't even have to have flood insurance, but I do. I didn't evacuate. I slept through the hurricane, and everything was fine, and my wife stayed with me, and then she didn't leave till the next day when the rising water started, and they said, well, you're not going to have electricity for 6 years and all that kind of stuff. And then she said, well, I'm out of here. But I've always felt very safe there. But I am in the part that would have been built up anyway, because the land is high and dry from the river overflowing its banks.
When you say markets wouldn't have created it just means that the insurance would be unaffordable.
But it's not just the insurance. The market, the cost of putting up and maintaining those levees and the flood walls, I don't think that people would have been willing to pay a private entrepreneur who would have had looking at all that and saying, gee, what is it going to cost me to do this? And then how much am I going to be able to sell land for, rent land for, whatever? I just don't think it would have been built to the extent it was.
Let me talk about this market failure idea. I guess it's possible if we collected half the GDP, which, by the way, the government now does, but let's say half of what's remaining, and put it all into Auburn. We could make palaces here. We could make the Versailles or something like that. But it's not true. I mean, Auburn is just a small town of 20, 30,000, and Opelika, is an ordinary town. But we could have palaces of gold if we took, say, 1/4 of the GDP and put it all into Auburn, Opelika. Does the fact that we didn't do that show that there's a market failure? No. Because in the view of the owners of this money and wealth and resources, they have decided in their infinite wisdom not to pour it all into Auburn. So it's hardly a market failure just because something magnificent and palatial could be existing here and isn't.
You have seen the football stadium downstairs.
Talk about palaces.
Yeah, but there's another thing that I don't think most people realize with respect to this. The Mississippi River comes down from the north, and it's got all kind of loops and bends, but then it comes over and it makes a dog leg coming down from the north. It makes a dog leg to the east before it gets to the Gulf, and the Mississippi River doesn't like that dog leg. Mississippi River, forces of gravity and all that, would like to head due south through the Atchafalaya Basin, the Atchafalaya River, the Atchafalaya Basin. You can see on the map where Morgan City is. That's where the Mississippi River wants to go. And the Corps of Engineers spends, I don't know how many millions and millions and millions of dollars a year trying to keep it from going that way, to keep the water flowing past the city of New Orleans. And if that, what they call the Old River Control Structure, if that thing ever breaks, the Mississippi River's heading south, and New Orleans is going to be pretty high and dry.
It's been going on since the interwar years, hasn't it?
Actually, I think that the levee system and getting all that started with the Great Flood of 27, which flooded out the whole Midwest and all that. And that's when the government really said, we're going to put this thing, we're going to teach the Mississippi River a lesson, about what it should do. We'll build up these levees and all that.
Make fun of the Soviets for trying to reverse rivers and things like that. It's funny. But it does raise a question. I mean, the more you ask these questions, the more questions there are. This levees only strategy of the Army Corps of Engineers is probably just wrong-headed, or at least since there's no innovation, there's no market test.
Yeah, well, we really can't tell what the market would do. It's sort of as if shoes were socialized all the time, and now some maniac was saying, well, we should privatize shoes, and immediately the questions would come up. Well, how would we get brown shoes? Would we have black ones, pink ones, whatever? How about shoelaces? Where would they sell shoes? How would the poor get shoes? Whatever. One of my interests that I have been slacking off since I've been working with Bill on macroeconomics, which we'll talk about, has been privatization of bodies of water, puddles, oceans, lakes, rivers, seas, whatever. My view is that if it moves, privatize it, and if it doesn't move, privatize it. And I'm not sure whether bodies of water are moving or not, but we've got it covered. They should all be privatized. Now, if the Mississippi River Company owned the Mississippi River and someone owned the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean or what have you, all we can say for sure is that things would probably be very different. They wouldn't be doing what the government is doing. And there would be some sort of market tests in terms of entrepreneurship and management, such that people who treated their resources rationally would make money and others wouldn't. So my view would be that ultimately, if you're talking about privatization, you're not just talking about streets or whatever. You're talking about the river and the lake and the oceans to the full extent. And that would be the ideal, to have everything private. And if everything were private, you'd have entrepreneurs doing things, not FEMA-type people who... It's not so much that FEMA didn't help, it's rather that FEMA prevented other people from helping. Somebody like Walmart would bring in bottles of water and FEMA would say, you can't do it. And then there were rescuers that were told to go to Atlanta to take lessons in sexual harassment or something like that. There's all sorts of stories. Lou had a wonderful thing on LouRockwell.com about the foibles of the Politburo type reaction.
Well, actually, you mentioned Walmart. As I said, I stayed through, and then after like the third day or something, there's something called a gumbo crew, which is some people I know, at any rate a family, organized it. They fed people, rescue workers up at the 9/11 site. They went up there. They call a gumbo crew, and so. They were cooking food for the emergency workers, and so I was going upriver every day to cook with them. And Walmart sent in, don't ask me how they were able to do it, but they sent in 3 of these huge tractor-trailer loads of food, perfectly gratis, for us to cook, to feed people. So that's, when people say, well, private charity won't work or anything, look, here's, those people, and they weren't the only ones. I mean, everybody was pitching in, from the top to the bottom. Everybody was in there doing whatever they could to try and help their fellow man. People say that, without government taking care of the needy, nothing, they'll all die on them. It's just pure nonsense. People overwhelmingly are basically good. Overwhelmingly, people are basically decent, honest, hardworking, and that kind of stuff. And when you don't see the right characteristics in people, you can usually go back, almost always go back and find that it's a result of something that government has done to change their mentality to a welfare mentality or something like that. But you leave people to their own devices, and they're basically decent, hardworking, nice people.
This might be a peculiar question, but some decades ago there was a debate in the literature about business and charity, whether business should be coughing up money for private donations for this and that. And Friedman wrote a famous article saying that really business shouldn't be in that. The business of business is to maximize value for the stockholders, and that's it. So they shouldn't be giving donations and charity.
Well, yeah, but there's more to maximizing value for stockholders than looking at the short-run profit and loss statement. In other words, the stockholders also, to use the terms of neoclassical analysis, are interested in utility welfare maximization, in the sense that again, that's neoclassical language. But in other words, whether you are an individual, whether you're an individual owning stock, whether you're the manager of a corporation, whatever, there is more that interests you than this narrow idea of homo economicus. And that's true also for the stockholders of companies, and the business managers have to take into account, look, does doing this charity it really improve the business? I mean, look, if doing charity gets you good publicity and it may generate more profits in the future or whatever, it may get you better employees. So, I mean, this idea that Friedman has that all the managers of the business should be doing is looking at what would maximize the short-run profits, and it's just, to my way of thinking, wrong way of looking at it.
Well, I think you have to divide the question into two. One, what would happen under pure free enterprise, and two, what would happen nowadays, or what does happen nowadays.
I agree.
For example, one of the big impetuses of the lawsuit against Microsoft, ostensibly on antitrust, was the fact that Microsoft wasn't giving charity, and not just charity, but payoffs to Washington, D.C., which I don't know if you want to call it charity or not. And so there's sort of defensive charity, or in other words, if a company knows that the bureaucrats are going to get after them if they don't give to the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, whatever, then you can justify it on the grounds, well, they got to protect themselves. Now, let's forget about that. Let's suppose we were in pure laissez-faire society, so there was none of this motivation to give to the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts, because if you didn't, then they would raise your taxes.
An example of that would be the price gouging, right? I mean, they're threatening Walmart with...
that's a whole...
Of course, they would have an incentive to give things away to demonstrate
right.
gouging.
Yes. Well, they'll shoot them for price gouging.
But in a purely free society where there'd be no problems of price gouging, then the question would be, I guess, laissez-faire. Should a company have blue tablecloths or green ones or pink ones? Well, let the market decide. In other words, some companies would then say, okay, look, we adopt the Friedman rule.
Exactly.
We give not one penny to anyone, and if you don't want to buy shares in our company, don't buy shares in our company.
And if you don't want to buy our products because of that, don't buy them. You don't want to work for us because of that. That's right.
Right. That would be one way of going. Another way of going would be, look, we're members of the community. We've got to give to the symphony orchestra. We've got to give to the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts, even though they don't want to have gay scout masters, etc., which is another subject. And then there'd be third, like Ben & Jerry's ice cream company would give money up the kazoo to everybody, and then you'd have a moderate view. And it might be that all sorts of firms could survive. Like large, medium, and small firms survive. Well, big, small, and medium, and no charity companies might all survive. In other words, the market would sort itself out, and there is no right answer or wrong answer.
Exactly.
So Friedman has only sort of got part of the answer, but I don't think he grasps the full panoply or beauty of the marketplace, where many different strategies. This is very similar with tenure. Should you have tenure or not? Well, in a purely free society, some companies or universities would have lots of tenure, others would have no tenure, others would have intermediate, sort of like, do you have long contracts or not? It's a management technique, and we Austro-libertarians don't specialize, unlike the Kochtopus types, in dictating management strategies. We would just say any non-invasive management strategy is legitimate, and let the market have, what Mao said, many flowers bloom, or let 100 flowers bloom. Well, let 100 techniques of charitable giving bloom, and we'll see. And maybe they'll all survive.
There was a funny article that came out soon after.
Are you in favor of freedom?
I mean, sometimes it's difficult to figure out all the implications of what that means, right?
Yeah, well, it's a many-splendored thing.
But there's an article that came out heralding Walmart's role in after the flood, and the article concluded something like, well, maybe Walmart should be in charge of FEMA. Which, of course, would be the worst thing, right?
Then they'd have government bureaucrats in there telling them, well, you're bringing the wrong colored toilet paper to these poor people who've been flooded out, So you'll have to change that.
Putting Walmart in charge of the relief efforts instead of FEMA is very similar to what George Bush is trying to do, is give charitable groups welfare money and let it be filtered through them.
Yeah, on grounds that private charity works better than
public
charity.
But the reason it works is because it's private.
Exactly.
I mean, there's this expression, shirt sleeves in 3 generations. It means that just because you're a successful businessman doesn't mean that you have any sort of guarantee. You're only successful today. Who knows about tomorrow? So what this philosophy is saying, you're a successful businessman. We'll put you in charge. Right. We'll take you out of the market which made you successful in the first place, and we'll assume that you'll be successful forevermore. The market is only a day by day, or you're only as good as your last sale.
But it's even worse than that, Walter, because it's to me, it's saying, look, here's a guy or a group of people who are wonderfully successful in the market as entrepreneurs, and now, because they were great as entrepreneurs, we're going to make socialists out of them, and socialist managers, and we expect them to be great at being socialist managers. And it seems to me that the very kind of people who are great as entrepreneurs and private sector managers would absolutely be at their worst in that socialist environment, and be the very ones who, after about a week, would get me the hell out of here, man. Yeah. Let me go back to the market.
And yet there is a certain coherence in it. In other words, when George Bush does that, or with, say, religious groups giving out charity because they do it so well, or when he says, let's let Walmart be in charge of relief efforts, there's a certain coherence about that. I mean, it's not totally crazy. The coherence is here, there are people who've proven themselves successful, so let's get the government behind them. Right. But the cloven hoof is that the market has its own logic, and you're just short-circuiting that.
And it's so sad, too, when you see, for example, a successful businessman being taken out of the market and put into public sector. What a loss to society that is.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. It's sort of like we say to our colleagues who become deans, you're going over to the dark side. You're being a bureaucrat, administrator. We're only kidding. Yeah. But here it's really true. They are going over to the dark side.
Well, in fact, if you think about it, probably the best thing you could do would be get the worst businessmen and put them in charge of the bureaucracies. Because they might so bollocks up the thing and all that they could do less evil than they do now. The agriculture department couldn't get the subsidies out to the farmers because nobody. They had a bunch of people who couldn't do anything, so the subsidies wouldn't go out. That kind of stuff. So it might actually be better if you did just the opposite. Get the very worst you can and put them in to run government.
That's it. I mean, the agricultural subsidies are a whole other issue. I mean, at one time there were a lot of farmers and very few farm bureaucrats. And as the years went on, there were fewer farmers and more bureaucrats. Yeah. And now I think the bureaucrats outnumber the farmers. It's just...
Supposedly that's true, that they have more people working for the ag department than they have farmers in this country, which makes eminently good sense to anybody who...
But, it is interesting that there seems to be an impulse, and it's widely shared, that if you really want something to be institutionalized and become a permanent part of the structure of our life as a society or something, you should codify it with a sort of a government imprimatur and say, that was really great what Walmart did at this flood. Let's make sure they do it again and appoint them as the official.
Absolutely.
It's
Precisely.
In so many areas of life, really.
Yeah.
Why is that? Is it the longing for certainty that people have? That freedom seems too uncertain. Like, you don't know for sure if Walmart's going to be there the next time. Whereas if you put them on the public payroll, then they definitely will be. Is that it?
Well, I think there are a lot of people out there who really are of very, very goodwill, good intention and all, and they look at it and they just say, gee, Walmart really helped this time, and this kind of emergency could arise in the future, and maybe if we can codify it or whatever you want to call it and put it in place, have it ready to go, it'll work better next time, it really will. And then, of course, you have some other people who are sitting around looking and saying, let me see how I can make a buck out of this, if the government's going to get involved, it's like in New Orleans, I don't know if you've heard the story, but about the guy who had a motorcycle shop, I guess customized motorcycles, and apparently had the right connections and got a contract to deliver over $100 million worth of, campers, and they, what do you call them, those motorhomes or whatever, not motorhomes, but, manufactured housing. I mean, if government's going to get involved, it's going to be corrupt.
Let me answer your question in a slightly different way and more generalize it. Your question was, why are people so open to this? And why, when they hold hearings on price gouging, do the senators think they can get away with this? Why do they think they'll have public support? And I think they're correct. They'll have public support, despite the fact that a lot of people have taken Economics 101 and know just what price gouging means. And one of the answers that makes sense to me is this whole socio-biological thing. Another experience I have is every time I get a freshman student, they're filled with this milk of socialism or human kindness, socialism. I mean, they're just predicated on that. I remember I had this class, they were really hopped up on the minimum wage, by the way, which Walmart has now shown itself to be a little weak on. And I wasn't planning on doing anything on the minimum wage, but somehow the class was so interested in this, so we did like 6 weeks of minimum wage. And at the end of that, there was this bright girl, I think she was the valedictorian of the whole school, and what she said is, I see your point, but I don't like it. There's sort of this visceral hatred and suspicion of the market. And the socio-biological analysis of this is that we've only been civilized for, 5,000, 10,000 years, but for millions of years before that we lived in caves or in the trees or wherever we were. And in those times you lived in groups of 10, 20, 30, 50 people, tops. And then the only kind of cooperation that you could have would be explicit cooperation. I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back, here, help me carry this buffalo or whatever it is. There could only be explicit cooperation. But now we live in groups of millions and billions of people. Now there's such a thing called implicit cooperation in markets. I mean, the way to get people to help the New Orleanians is to allow prices in New Orleans to rise. So that brings incentives for people from Tennessee or Auburn to come help us. In addition to the ordinary benevolence, have selfishness as a motive. But people are not biologically attuned to this yet because it's too short a time biologically.
They're hardwired the other way?
Hardwired the other way, precisely.
Professor Hayek, I believe. Is that your name?
Well, Hayek was, this was one of the Hayek insights. Look, Hayek wasn't all bad. When Jeff came into the room, Bill and I were having this furious debate over Hayek. Is he a Pinko? Is he really an Austrian? This, that, and the other. But I don't.
Well, actually, we're talking about Kerzner.
Well, Kerzner on Hayek. It was, but now it's relevant to the Hayek, and Hayek certainly believed in this. Yes, and I think there's a lot of sense to that people are hardwired towards socialism, which is why we have this sort of rock of Sisyphus. We, the Mises Institute, the Loyola Group, all people who are favoring free enterprise, Austro-libertarians. You just keep having to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. It's such a struggle because biologically people are hardwired to have the opposite view.
Walter, when you say hardwired, see, I'm not sure. I mean, I think I agree with some of what you're saying. I'm not sure really exactly what's involved with that hardwiring, though. I think about the stuff about, and we were talking about this very thing the other day, about the rationality versus the emotions. And much as, in the Misesian sense that, yes, every human action is rational, but if you, from a praxeological point of view, but if you go to themology, or however you pronounce that word, then we, get into psychology. We have to admit that there are, from that point of view, there's irrationality. Just like from praxeological, there's no indifference, but when you get over to themology, I'm indifferent to whether I wear the red or blue shirt. And my point is that when you get over there, people are affected very much by their emotions. And so all kind of slogans like, just think about it, from each according to his ability, to each according to his deeds. I mean, my God, doesn't that sound great in some, not if you rationally analyze it.
My favorite one on that is, what is it, profits, not people, not profits.
Yeah, people, not profits. Well, and my favorite is, human rights over property rights. And I tell my students, I say, oh yeah, sure, that chair has rights, and I think we ought to defend them to the death.
But the point is, why is the emotion so antithetical to the market?
I don't know. See.
Well, that's the sociobiology.
Rhetoric?
Education. No, I mean, it's just...
Oh, I don't think it's education. I remember my little daughter, when she was like in the second grade, she'd come home, Daddy, you're being environmentally incorrect, She's just a little baby, and I would try to argue with her, and my wife would sort of slap me around and say, shut up, don't talk to her, because if you convince her...
Your wife had taught her the other thing.
Right. Well, maybe, but the point is that if I convinced Hannah that, the markets could help with environmentalism, and she started spouting that off, all of her little cronies in the third grade would be against her, so we didn't want to do that.
What about this insight, that to be aware of economic law as part of the structure of reality, and the way it limits how we can control the world, that is some outside force at work. We don't like to think about that because we want to believe that.
Well, yeah, of course.
Whereas economic law says, no, there's some things you can't do. Well, that's a.
But nobody wants to believe in scarcity.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to believe in scarcity because as soon as you have to face the reality of scarcity, it tells you, guess what? All those dreams that you have, all those longings and wants you have and all that, guess what, friend? You better think again because you're not going to have everything you want. Or as they say, they don't say, but you can't have it all. And so, sure, that's exactly, people really, really want to live in a post-scarcity world. And part of the problem with some economics, as I see it, is that it essentially tells people that, hey, if you just put the right people in charge, the best and the brightest, those of us who not only know more than everybody else, but are so morally upright that we can be trusted with all this power. If you just put us in charge, why, in no time at all, we'll live in a post-scarcity world because we'll so organize the world and the way things are done that we'll just do away. Everybody will have what they need, what they want.
This point about you can have it all, I think, rings a chord in me with the feminist thing. The idea that young women can have it all. They can get a Nobel Prize in chemistry, they can have 5 kids, they can have a loving relationship. It's sort of post-scarcity or non-scarcity applied to feminism or to male-female relations, and it's been a horror.
Absolutely.
A lot of women went that way and didn't have children and greatly regret it. And then this whole thing with what's his name from Harvard, the president of Harvard, who said that maybe women Summers, women couldn't be top mathematicians or something. He was practically killed by the academics because even at a supposedly great university like Harvard, you're not allowed to talk about these things, let alone actually analyze them.
Right. Well, it's also true with anybody coming out of with an undergraduate degree these days. They believe that they're going to enter the workforce, get a high salary because they have a degree, and they're going to be in charge of others.
And rightfully so.
And so they enter the workforce with this attitude. Listen, I just came up as an objection to your point, Walter.
Yes, sure.
If what you're saying is right, you would have a hard time accounting for the liberal revolution, for the existence of liberty at all.
Well, I would say that I've heard this argument before, and I would say that freedom is an aberration. If you look back at the broad history of civilization of all around the globe for the last, 5,000-10,000 years, how much liberty have we ever had? Okay, you had the U.S. in 1776, and you had England for a century, and you have the Mises Institute. But the Libertarian Party gets, 0.1% of the vote? Well, it's part of the evidence that freedom is an aberration. Freedom is a precious flame that we've got to keep.
Explain why the aberration exists.
But you say why they exist. It's something that happens. It's like throwing all the seeds up in the air, and most of them fall on fallow ground and all that. But one happens to land in a place and it blooms for a while until a guy comes along with the sickle and cuts it down. We have less freedom today in this society than our forebears did 200 years ago. They didn't have this overweening federal government intervening in everything in their life, sending out every 10 years, if not more frequently now, this so-called census where what they need to do is count people so they can allocate the representatives to the Congress. No, they send this thing out and they want to know how many bathrooms you have in your house and, do you have carpets on you, all this kind of stuff. I mean, we have lost so much of the freedom that the people who went before us fought for and bled for, that it's immoral for us to just acquiesce in this loss of freedom that we have. And in the United States, I mean, this is much like Rome. If you say, well, the Roman Empire ended when Caesar crossed the Rubicon and went down, you're kidding yourself, I mean, the Roman Republic ended then. You're kidding yourself. I mean, the Roman Republic, Caesar couldn't have crossed the Rubicon and been successful if the Roman Republic was alive in any real sense at the time he did that. Rome continued in its material glory and expanding the empire and all that for a long time after that. But in terms of human liberty, Rome was on the decline, okay? In our society, I believe, has been on the decline. I can't set an exact date, but I think it's the date in 1787 when Hamilton's gang hijacked the Articles of Confederation, went to Philadelphia and wrote a constitution. I am basically an anti-federalist, not a federalist. And so I really think that in terms of human liberty, we have been on the decline since then, even though materially we're growing. But now we're going to reach a point, who knows, it could be very soon, given the amount of debt that we have internationally and the way nobody's saving domestically and the huge amount of government intervention, where we enter into a long period of economic stagnation and decline, and of course with increasing losses of our liberty. I think Walter, to go back, I think Walter's right. Human liberty is an aberration.
Well, I would give further evidence. Look at the careers of Mises and Rothbard. They were spurned and hated and not given their due. I think at one time, I just read Guido's book, his forthcoming book on Mises' biography, magnificent book. And at one time, Mises and Hayek were seriously contemplating the end of Austro-libertarianism. When I first met Murray in 1966, 1967, thanks to him, I think I knew every libertarian in the whole world, and there were just a dozen of them. It was, and this was after the Mises depression period. I don't mean economic depression, but personal depression over the fact that liberty was dying. It's just lucky that there was a Rothbard to carry it on and fan the flames and have the pizzazz and the presence to create a whole movement. Without him, possibly liberty would be something you read about in David Hume or John Stuart Mill or Adam Smith or the Founding Fathers or something. We're just very lucky we've got some of it. But I think that if you look at it realistically over all the centuries of all the countries in the world and ask how much liberty we've had very, very little of it. It's a very rare, precious thing.
What are you talking about? We've got a tremendous market revolution taking place in China.
There are some.
The central planning is unraveling. Yes,
there are some.
That's what
There are some good
no. Wait. Hold the horses here. To say that central planning is unraveling, is I think to misunderstand you. Would you screw the mic up, Walter?
I don't know what happened.
But at any rate, I think that is to misunderstand what's going on out there. The socialists of all nations, as Hayek referred to them, and I would say, the old definition of socialism, ownership of the means of production, is really outmoded. What the real issue is, who's going to control, things? Is it people going to control their own lives or other people, and particularly, from my point of view as an economist, with respect to production, etc.? Well, what they've realized is that this old way of controlling things, where the state owns everything and makes all these decisions, hey, that doesn't work, and we can't do it. So now they give up and say, okay, everybody can own property, and you can do this, and you can do that, and all. But guess what? Here's 400 pages of regulations if you want to open a snowball stand. Yeah. Well, you say a planned market. I don't even know if I like the term. I like the idea of an interventionist. It's an interventionist economy. So the idea that the Chinese are having more economic liberty now than they did, under the heyday of Mao, and that may go on increasing for a while. But they haven't given up politically. And even if the Communist Party loses power there, they're still going to have some sort of government. And that government, the people who constitute that government, are going to find it in their own self-interest to increase regulation. And that's what's going to happen.
And this gets us back to the point we were talking about earlier. There's this impulse to impose markets, or to control them, or kind of make them public property. Well, as with the Iraq War, part of the idea here is that we're going to go into this country, we're going to establish a sort of democratic market society, to force, and it's the same thing with school reform, in the U.S. We're going to impose a kind of market setting on education, and Social Security. We're going to have a kind of a market. Centrally planned market settings. We're going to use market forces to benefit public good in some way.
Yeah, I guess this is called neoliberalism. I'm not sure what it's called. Quasi-markets. Milton Friedman is a sort of a past master at this, sort of getting quasi-markets in tradable emissions rights and educational vouchers and all sorts of other weird semi-demi quasi-markets, very similar to the Tito kind of communism. We'll have a socialism, but within the socialism we'll have some sort of market.
Yes.
And this sort of just gives markets a bad name almost.
But what it does, it allows the exploiters, the parasites, who Marx thought of as the bourgeoisie and the what we would call entrepreneurs and all, but who in point of fact are the people who are the governmental class, who are the parasites and the exploiters. What it does is allow them to maintain the exploitation longer. In other words, if the public schools are about to collapse, like they are in New Orleans, and who knows what could replace it? My God, we might actually have free market education. Well, wait, I've got a reform here, you see, where it's still going to be under the government, but or whatever, you see, and. In fact, New Orleans, one of the things they did was they were going to put all, and I don't know, I haven't been there, so I don't know now in a few weeks, but they were going to set up all the schools on the West Bank as under one charter company, you see, but the people on the school board were going to who had screwed up the schools were going to be in charge of that charter company. You see? So, I mean, it's just a way for the oppressors, the exploiters, to extend their control in the face of a system that's coming to collapse, it's coming to gridlock, and say, well, wait, maybe we can break the gridlock and extend our control for a longer, greater period of time.
It's really striking. What it points to is the danger, the worst kind of leaders you could have right now are those who sort of believe in markets. They exercise enormous power, and they believe in the power of markets, and so they're going to sort of harness those on behalf of the state and its interests. And it's probably what we see largely in something like a Republican administration.
Yeah, and as I said...
Wait. Are you suggesting that this administration, that Republican administrations, for example, like Nixon and now like Bush, that how much did the size of the government increase under these guys? Are you suggesting that they believe in small government other than rhetorically?
Yeah. Well,
because you and I are going to have a talk if you believe that.
Well, but Bush administration staffed all up and down and all over the place with people who had training and liberal thought.
Yeah. Well, it was the same with Reagan. I mean, Reagan was great on rhetoric. You listen to some of his speeches and you say, my God, Murray Rothbard was a speechwriter. But the government in California, when he was a governor, grew. The government of the United States grew.
The worst in some ways.
Oh, yeah.
But the real question now between the Democrats and Republicans is simple. Under which one will the government grow least rapidly? Under which one will it become, they're all becoming more intrusive in our lives, under which one will the increase in intrusiveness be less?
Is there an answer to that? A priori answer?
Praxeologically, I have it, but I'm not telling anybody. And only, since it's praxeological, only I could know it, right?
Why don't y'all talk a little bit about what you've been working on besides clusters?
We've been working on having a good time.
Yeah.
We laugh a lot.
I know.
We laugh a lot when we work together.
Well, the wing of the building over there used to be almost monastic, but now it's just always raucous and interesting.
Well, when we first came here, I made a list of Katrina projects, and we only had 5 or 6 of them. One of them was the triangle paper. Bill and I just wrote an article about the fact that the triangle, which is a big part of the Austrian... The Hayekian triangle, which is a big part of the Austrian analysis of Austrian business cycle theory. We have some problems with that.
I don't think that's correct.
Oh, no?
I don't think it's correct to say it's a big part of the Austrian analysis. I think it's a big part of the way that Austrians try to explicate their analysis.
Fair enough.
I think there's a big difference.
We think it's a wrong path. And,
yes,
so that was true. One of our criticisms of the triangle, and we now have this paper called the post-triangle. Given that the triangle is not the way to go, well, what is the way to go? And part of that is interest sensitivity of various goods, regardless of structures of production. So it's sort of a little bit of a critique of Bombewerk and Hayek and certainly Roger Garrison. So that's one paper. We have. I don't know if you want to talk about that more.
Well, no. He calls that a paper, and it's I think maybe 100 pages long or something. It's more like a monograph. But at any rate, but Walter's very wordy.
Do you offer an alternative graphical exposition?
No.
Our view is that the graphical analysis is sort of a wrong step for Austrians. If you look at Mises, he didn't have any graphs.
And there's a simple, what I believe, reason for this, okay? And that is, as soon as you draw a graph now, you're implying the mathematics. And you can't capture the essence and the truth of human action in mathematics. And the triangle, as we point out, you don't need a triangle to do what they're doing. Really, the only thing that's important, quote, in the triangle is that hypotenuse. And I can write you an equation for any hypotenuse because it's just a line. It's one line or curve in a two-dimensional space. So hell, I can write you an equation for that right now. And then, as soon as you put it in that, and we do in the paper, that's one of the things we do, then you immediately say, well, gee, that equation, the way they wrote that doesn't look too different from, say, a neoclassical growth equation. How about that? Even though the two things are, in a sense, completely unrelated, but the other thing that came out, one of the things that came out of this was that, and we're going to put this into kind of a separate thing, that Mises says that new capital projects must be more roundabout than extant ones. And so we have a problem with that, and we've got a paper going there. So I just wanted to mention that.
But a second paper that's part of.
Well, actually, we've got maybe 30 papers that we're working on, and we don't know what the hell we're working on because there's so many. We have to write them down so we can remember which papers we're working on.
But some of them, because of the opportunity we've had now, some of them we've actually started and finished since we've been here. I mean, we did one on rates of time preference. The the ideas were kind of hanging around in the background, wouldn't you say, someplace in a file on a paragraph or something. But we were able to take that and turn that into a paper and send it off. And so, anyway, we have a bunch of things that we've done like that Walter can...
Well, another paper was Laidler, who is a mainstream person, and every once in a while some mainstream person will condescend and sort of talk about Austrianism, and usually they get it wrong. But we had this very interesting paper on Laidler, and we sent it to a journal, and one of the things that Bill and I keep laughing about is the referee said... what was it? Make believe Laidler's mother is reading it.
No, we were too nasty in the way we wrote. Wasn't that there was anything substantively wrong with the criticism, but, it was just, and that's Walter. See, I'm a nice guy. Walter's nasty,
But Laidler didn't pretend that Mises' mother was.
Oh, no.
Well, you don't seem to understand the game.
Right.
Let me explain the rules to you.
It's a one-way street. So Bill and I now have this joke whenever there's anything comes up. Well, what would X's mother think about this? So.
But we were able to finish, the revisions that they wanted, and finish that paper.
Another two mainstream economists who've criticized Austrian business cycle theory in ways that we haven't criticized that are Eichengreen and Michener, and we're working on a paper there. And then there's this guy, Tyler Cowen, who wrote another critique of Austrian business cycle theory, and we're having...
Well along on the... book. Yeah, it was a book. Yeah.
It was a book, but there was a chapter in it on the ABCT, so we're criticizing that.
Has that been criticized anywhere?
Oh, I'm sure it has been. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mean his book?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the book
sure.
has, but I don't think that this article on business. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and check and see if we cited anyone else who's criticized it. But to my recollection,
I think we did.
Are there other people that have criticized Cowen business cycle?
Oh, sure. Yeah, some people criticize. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I don't remember it offhand.
Let's see. What else? Well,
Coase. We just got finished with a Coase paper. We're jumping on Coase for a change.
That's with one of the NYU's law journals, the Journal of Law and Liberty, I think.
A new NYU journal, which is sort of libertarian.
That article is in the proof stage now. So
when talking about collecting all the Austrian writings on Coase, the problem is that it's like a 15-volume work.
Yeah, well, we have a little Coase industry here.
And then another paper that, again, it was... kind of started before we came here with a paragraph stuck away in a file somewhere, but that we then completed just yesterday, I guess, and Walter set it off, was a paper about, it's about Say's law and Keynes' money, and it brings in the post-Keynesians. And what it does is very, very interesting. If you read, I can remember growing up, Walter and I about the same age, I think I'm a few months older, a year older, and I can remember when they said that money doesn't matter, and for the Keynesians, money doesn't matter. And it always struck me as strange because here's his magnum opus, it's the general theory of employment, interest, and money. Well, if money doesn't matter, why is he putting it in the title of his magnum opus? And then just before that, he's got the 2-volume treatise on money, and before that, the tract on money and all that. And then you go in this thing.
Let me just make just another point on this. The question is, are the Chicagoans Keynesians?
No.
And our view is that there are two types of Keynesians. There are the Keynesians located in Chicago, and then there are the Keynesians located elsewhere. They're all Keynesians. And Friedman was quoted by Samuelson in Samuelson's textbook, where the quote was from Friedman, "We're all Keynesians now." And I asked Milton about that, and he said, well, Samuelson misquoted me, and here's what I said, and here's my paraphrase of it. And he said, well, when it comes to the public policy recommendations in macro and micro, there's a gigantic gulf and a big difference between us and the Keynesians. However, when it comes to the tools of analysis, we're all Keynesians now. And I thought this was a reasonable summation, because surely the methodological, technical way that you approach a problem is much more important, and is the undergirding of the public policy recommendations, which are mixed up with values and stuff like that. So we have a part in this paper where we lovingly characterize the Chicagoans as Keynesians.
But to me, what's interesting about this is that in his 36 work, Keynes says that, look, what's critically important is money, and money has these two essential characteristics, which he refers to as the zero elasticity of production and zero elasticity of substitution. And yet, if you go out in the literature and look, the first thing I can ever find on that is a 52 or 53 article by Aberlurner where he mentions it, but kind of gets it wrong. And the only school of thought that takes this seriously are the post-Keynesians, and they get it wrong. I mean, and one of the things we point out there is that Paul Davidson, who is the dean of at least American post-Keynesians, if not worldwide, in something he was writing very recently, and I forget the exact site to it, says, good God, look at what's happened to growth rates in the OECD countries since, we got off of fixed exchange rates in 73. He says, the growth rates have collapsed and the unemployment rates have gone up and all. And one of the big problems, he's not saying the whole thing, one of the big problems is lack of fixed exchange rates. And then you say, well, what about, oh no, gold isn't money, gold can't be money, anathema, and I'm saying, wait a minute. The gold standard is the best system of fixed exchange rates you can have. Now, to have gold money is even better, because if you have gold money, you don't have a system of exchange rates. It's just an ounce of gold for 4 quarter ounces or whatever. But if you have even a gold standard, it's the best system of fixed exchange rates you can have. And yet they're absolutely opposed to the use of gold as money, barbarous relic, and all that stuff. And yet they're all in favor of fixed exchange rates. So what do they want? They want fiat money, fixed exchange rates. I mean, it's insane.
The Chicagoans have been dining out on the notion that money matters. And as if only the Chicagoan monetarists think that money matters, but even the Keynesians think that money matters. They have different views on it, and one of the things that this paper makes clear is that money matters for them as well. The big problem that they have with fiat currency is that when you have changes in liquidity preference, and people want more money, that this doesn't create jobs, because you can always add a zero to a dollar bill, and
it doesn't take anything to produce more money. You don't need labor to produce more money.
Right, just add a few more zeros. And they do concede that gold is helpful, but only if you live in a gold-producing country. Then they can go into the gold mines, and that creates jobs.
Assuming that the gold was money.
Assuming that you had gold as money, right? Yeah. But only a few countries. But our point is, look, you don't have to have a gold mining industry in your country. All you have to do is produce pianos or something and ship it out for the gold. So it doesn't matter that you don't have a gold mining apparatus in your country.
Well, and then the other thing, too, is that's the zero elasticity of production part, and then there's the zero elasticity of substitution. But again, it's relevant for a society of fiat money. But if you had a free society where you would have commodity monies, well, if everybody said, assuming that in that kind of society you could have one of these collapses in confidence and a flight to liquidity and all that, and everybody said, oh no, we don't want to invest in goods, we want money, And so all of a sudden everybody would be hoarding their gold, right? And the value of gold would be going up, and nobody would be spending it. As Sean Corrigan would say, yeah, you mean they're not going to eat? But anyway, at any rate, what would happen is if the value of gold coins, as money went up and up in value and nobody was paying, people would say, well, geez, what about silver? Let's use silver coins, Let's have some platinum coins. Let's make, bronze, zinc, lead, whatever coins. I mean, and you don't have a zero elasticity of substitution of other goods for money, okay, in a free economy. In fact, the money might consist of some other goods. You might have gold and silver to begin with, silver for small transactions, gold for large. But even if you didn't, the market would generate that. That's the very kind of opportunity that entrepreneurs are out there looking for all the time. Geez, look, the value of gold is going up. Money's scarce. Well, geez, what can we do? How about silver coin? I never would have thought of that.
Another point we make in this paper is that even if you have a fiat currency, as long as the government doesn't have controls over wages, you don't need jobs creating dollar bills or gold or anything. If ever you have unemployment, that means that the wages are too high. And if the wages fall, you have no more unemployment. So even with a fiat currency, obviously we don't favor a fiat currency, but even with a fiat currency, there's none of this neo-Keynesian stuff that's justified.
But you still need to, even in that, get away from that super macro analysis that the monetarists and the Keynesians use and all, and say, well, it's not really that you need wages to fall. You need some wages to fall relative to prices, say a lot, and others to fall maybe a little bit. In other words, you've got to let the real wages adjust in the market to where they do it. But, talking about these other things, a couple of other things we've got, which are going, is we've got a paper on the rate of time preference, which we refer to as a praxeological oxymoron. The rate of time preference, and that's going to be interesting when we get that one.
The point here is
did we send that one out already?
I'd have to check, but
a lot of people would be very interested in reading that one.
Oh yes, you see the point is like, suppose I prefer red sweater to blue sweater. Is there a rate at which I prefer it? No, you can't have. Preference doesn't admit of rates. Preference is what Mises called singularism. It's either this or that.
Yes.
So you prefer a bow tie to a regular tie. Someone else prefers a regular tie to a bow tie. There's no rate at which you prefer it.
Right. The same thing with time.
The same thing with time preference.
Did you say you finished this paper on time?
I don't know.
No, we finished it.
It's amazing because a lot of times people dip into this area and never quite get out of it.
Oh, no. And it's a relatively short paper. Because what you have to do is distinguish between interest and interest rates, okay? And get into time preference that way. And we're not saying that the concept of time preference is a praxeological oxymoron. Right. We're saying the rate. Yeah. As long as you talk about time preference, they're good. That's now we've got ordinal, and we can do this, and we don't have rate. As soon as you say rate, wait a minute, rate. Now you're talking about objective, and you're talking about cardinality, and that doesn't exist in economics. And then, so we've got that one.
Along these lines, doesn't he in his paper on interest rates? Did you?
Guido's paper on interest rates is an interesting paper. I've read it about 3 or 4 times, and I'm not sure what he says. I think what I get out of it, and I think there's a lot more in there. The problem with Guido is you have to read things. I mean, he is brilliant. The problem with it is that he puts so much in there, you really have to study it very carefully. What I get from him is he's talking about actual versus theoretical, or what would have occurred had it not been.
The natural versus the actual.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is a very minor paper. In a sense, it's only a terminological dispute. If you wanted to deprecate it, you could say it's just terminology. But I think it makes it makes a deeper point, because rates lead to cardinality, and cardinality leads to math. And here we are with the view that math is not a technique applicable to human action. And all of a sudden we're talking about rates. Well, where do you get rates compatible with preferences?
Well, and then another one that we've started on, but we haven't, we're just getting started on it. We get started on a lot, and it takes time to do them all. But is the idea of the value scale, right?
Yeah.
The value scale is a praxeological oxymoron also.
This is part of the demand curve math paper.
Yeah, one we just finished and sent out last night was one on math, demand curves as a mathematical. And the idea is that, to me, it's one of those things. As soon as it's so obvious that as soon as somebody says it, you say, "Of course." If you were to look at the physics of a gas, and they relate 3 variables: the pressure, the temperature, and the volume. Okay, and you say, "Well, okay." What we'll do is we'll show a graph of the relationship between the pressure and the temperature holding volume constant. And so you plot all the points, and you can do that. You can put the damn thing, the gas, in a container where it can't get out, and you can measure the pressure, and you can measure the temperature, and you can vary one and the other one can, and you can plot it, right? And notice every place along that plot, you got a different value of pressure and a different value of temperature and pressure, but the volume is the same. Now you can get a bigger container, you see, and you can do the same thing, and you can get a different relationship between temperature and pressure with the volume. You say, because volume, you vary volume now. But notice when you draw those curves, everything except the things that are measured on the 2 axes are held constant, and they're the same at every point on there. So we asked the question, we said, well, look, here's a demand curve. And so on a demand curve, you're saying, well, everything that affects the demand is held constant except the price and the quantity. So as price comes down, quantity increases. That's why demand curve slows down. And what are these other things that are held constant? And we teach them in principles. Tastes of preferences, prices of other goods, income, wealth, that kind of stuff. And then I ask the question, I say, well, why then, if this is human behavior we're talking about, picturing, why do you have to lower the price in order to sell more, for the buyer to be willing to buy more? And the answer is because depending on which view of this you look at, and we go at both of them so we won't antagonize groups, one of them would say, well, look, it's very simple. The marginal utility of the fourth unit is higher than the marginal utility of the fifth unit. Well, then marginal utility has changed. But wait, that violates the rules. The rules say everything has to be constant along the curve. And if you say, well, no, I don't believe in that marginal utility stuff, I believe in the new marginal rate of substitution stuff, well, then guess what? The marginal rate of substitution of the fifth unit is lower than the marginal rate of substitution of the fourth unit. In either case, something has changed along the curve. Well, that violates the laws of mathematics, and it violates the laws of economics that say that we're going to hold, conceptually all the other variables that affect this constant, ceteris paribus. In both cases, it violates the same concept that something's changing. One is a mathematical, looked at from a very, mathematical objective point of view. The other is from a subjective point of view. But the answer is simple. You can't have a curve where you're graphing P versus Q and saying everything else is constant, because it's not. So demand curves are amathematical. And I thought that was interesting. Don't you?
Yeah, yesterday was the second day that we had what we call a two-paper day, where we actually sent out 2 papers to journals. Yeah. We did that once before, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah. I would say we must have sent out about 10 papers in the week that the 4 or 5 weeks we've been here. We also list new ideas for papers that we'll write in the future, and we must have 25 new ideas for new papers. So,
how many years did Mises have in Geneva? I think he had 6 years, didn't he?
Yeah.
Mises in Geneva?
Oh, I think, about 6 years.
Imagine what you took to do in that period of time. This is just...
Well, I think, look, to talk about him and I and Mises in the same breath, I think, it's a whoa. Mises is easily the greatest social scientist of all times, easily. In my opinion, nobody else is in his class.
One of the things that I don't know if this is true of Bill, you speak to this yourself, but before this very intensive study that Bill and I have done for about a month, I hate to say it, but Mises wasn't one of my favorite characters, because he was a little weak on libertarianism, he wasn't an anarchist, this and that and the other. But I tell you, this intensive study that we've done has made me appreciate Mises much more than I ever appreciated Mises.
And which book? Everything?
It's not just any one book, because we're delving in this book, we're quoting that one, we're citing this.
This article.
It's just to you when you come to the Mises Institute.
Yeah.
But you see, what Walter is without maybe fully, maybe he does fully realize. Well, what's going on here is there is a significant difference between Walter and I. Even though we get along wonderfully, we sit down, we write together, we work together every day, we have lunch together almost every day, not just here, but at home, and we talk economics and all that. Walter is more of a Rothbardian, and I am more of a Misesian. Now, Rothbard is a natural rights person, and I am too. I'm not a utilitarian like Mises, but Mises is a classical liberal, and Rothbard's an anarchist, and Walter's an anarchist, and I'm a classical liberal. Yes, I'm a deviationist. Yes. and there's been more than one time when Walter has called the party, the Politburo together to get after me. But the other thing is that Walter is, if you were to look and say, well, what is your first love in terms of your study, your research, and all that, he would tell you anarchism or libertarianism, and of course a major subset of that right up there is the economics. If you go to me and say, what about you? I'm not a libertarian theorist like Walter is. That's his thing. At the core of my being, I'm an economist. And that's what's important to me. And as far as writing papers on, is blackmail a good, should it be legal and all that, I mean, please. That just, no, and not that I don't think it's, but that's not me.
That's what you want Walter to do at nights and weekends.
Well, Walter can do it. Listen, Walter can do it whenever he wants. Okay? We don't, but I'm just saying that it really is. Walter's pointing out a difference. He is a Rothbardian, and I'm a Misesian. Okay? And I am not fully, I'm natural rights, not utilitarian. But again, to me, economics is the key, not the key, my true love, as opposed to anarchist theory. And whereas I think if Walter, if you gave him the choice, you could write the ultimate economics work or the ultimate, anarchist libertarian work, he would choose the latter.
That's true, Walter.
No, I think there's a lot of truth to that. I would say the Mises Institute right now has 2 journals that are ongoing, scholarly journals, Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics and Journal of Libertarian Studies. If Bill and I were to be appointed editors of each of them, taking over from Joe and Roderick, not that I'm suggesting this, we would reject it because we want to do writing rather than editing. But I would be clearly more the JLS type, and Bill would be more QJAE type. It's interesting. Before I came to Loyola, I looked at my CV for the last 5 or 6 or 10 years, and a lot of my publications were libertarian, not economic, let alone macro. I did very little macro. And in the 5 years since I've been there, there's been a reversal. It's been much more economics and a little less libertarian, although I've still kept my end up on the libertarian front. But not only have I veered over under Bill's tutelage from libertarian emphasis to more of an equal emphasis, but within economics, I don't know how many articles I've done on economics, maybe 50 or 60 out of my 250 articles, but most of them, virtually all of them, were in micro. Maybe 2 or 3 out of the 50 or 60 were in macro. But since I've gotten under Bill's baleful influence, he's convinced me that macro is to micro as chess is to checkers, and macro is where it's at. And I'm still not a macroeconomist, but I'm much more into it because we've co-authored a lot of articles in macro. So I'm much more heavily macro-ish than I was before.
I'm so pleased that you 2 had a chance to work together, and you're leaving next week.
Yeah, we're going back.
I'll be leaving bright and early Tuesday morning, probably about 4:30, maybe.
I'm not sure. It depends upon whether the place sinks or not. I might come back with my tail between my legs.
New Orleans will open again in January.
Well, we've registered our students. I spent a day earlier this week on the computer registering students, and God willing, the officers
and the creek don't rise.
Yeah, and the creek don't rise. but we're all right if the creek rises, the Mississippi River, because that we're pretty safe from that. At any rate. But the people are back working on campus. My wife works now at the law school. She's been going to work every day, and the staff is expected back the Monday after Thanksgiving, and everybody's expected back January 2nd, which is a Monday, everybody, and faculty and all, and classes start January the 9th. So, we're hoping that we'll be a viable enterprise. I mean, I certainly am. I went on that campus as a freshman in the fall of '58. It really is my home, as much as where I live.
So the Mises Institute is your home away from home.
Well, I do, and I'm so thankful to Lou and to you, to everybody here. And it's just been so wonderful to us. It's just been unbelievable.
At some point in the future, let's do another podcast.
Oh, absolutely. This has been great. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, our pleasure.